morning, and welcome to this discussion that will deal with a very sensitive topic in academia in South Africa at the moment, and that is around the issue of the recognition of creative output in the academy. South Africa has been challenged over the past to recognize work that has been done by what we call the creatives in the music sector, those who do music compositions, those who perform, those who engage with productions, who do arrangements. Up until now, the university system was such that only published research was recognized for the generation of revenue or for promotion within certain universities. And that brought about a tension within the academy, particularly between those individuals who were practitioners themselves, who felt that they were being marginalized in the system. What we did have in the country at certain institutions was some internal mechanism where recognition was given to individuals who were engaging with the artistic practice. So what has happened this year is a very important event in that the South African government has now formulated a policy on what we call creative output, work done by creatives. And this document is being discussed across the higher education spectrum. And it's a document that's pretty much going to define the parameters and also the metrics with which we would be engaging with what the creatives do within the university, with a hope that we can finally come around to some kind of agreement between what would be seen on to achieve a sense of parity between what has been the practice up until now, between published research and creative research. The discussion this morning will also deal with aspects about practice-led research and artistic research. And to achieve these goals or to engage us on these topics, I have two special guests this morning, one of whom has flown some 22 hours, I gather, from the US, Professor Kris Chesky, whom I got to meet at the ISME conference several years ago. And Kris Chesky is the head of the Center for Music and Medicine at the University of North Texas. He comes as a recognized performer, having studied at Berklee College. Not that I'm punting for Berklee College this afternoon or this morning, but he is a performer of note. And I also have next to me a postdoctoral student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, an individual who has established herself as a performer and a reputable researcher and the chair of the South African Research Institute for Music, South African Society for Research in Music, Mareli Stolp. So I would like to commence by asking Professor Chesky firstly, that given the history of the academy in the US, where you have both practitioners as well as researchers, how has the US managed to achieve a balance between these two aspects in the academy by trying to get satisfaction, if there is satisfaction, or recognition from both colleagues who are in the practice as well as those who are in research? So if you want to tell us a little bit about what happens in the US, what metrics you use, how is it done, etc., and what are the challenges that you've had, if we can start there.
Well, first of all, thank you, Chats, for inviting me today. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and be in South Africa once again. If I seem a little bit foggy, it's because I've had a few hours sleep after a 24-hour flight, but glad to be here and hopefully able to contribute a bit. As you're talking and as we've talked over the last few hours, the thing that comes to my mind is the context-specific environment that these activities take place. Really, really important. I work at the University of North Texas, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, college of music in the United States, if not the world. And it's an accredited institution, so that's one of the contextual ideals that I want to put out there, frameworks. So we have an accrediting body in the United States that oversees accreditation practices for over 650 schools of music. And there's a handbook that provides some specifications as to how tenure and promotion practices should be organized at an accredited institution. So we follow those guidelines. And then, of course, the context that's unique to the school itself is really important. because of the size and scope of the University of North Texas College of Music, we have, I guess you could say, even subcontext within the broad context. So we have 7 divisions: composition, performance, jazz studies, music education, history and theory, keyboard. And each one of these divisions is sort of a situation in and of themselves. And I want to bring our attention to that because that's where the dialogue happens that defines the specific criteria that the faculty are aware of in order to meet certain thresholds of accomplishment are prescribed. So there's policies and procedures that lay out expectations for a junior faculty, for instance, to achieve tenure and promotion to associate faculty. And there are specific guidelines and policies and practices spelled out for each division, which are different across divisions, that lead to full professorship. And within our university, these divisions spell out those expectations differently. And some of them reflect the discipline in which we're trying to engage scholarly activities. So jazz studies would be unique to jazz studies, keyboard would be unique to keyboard practices, and so on. Then the other aspect of this process that I want to point out is that it is not a situation where there is a specific threshold that needs to be met, but rather a group of things, a collection of activities that need to be represented in a faculty's portfolio in order to make rank or to make tenure or to advance it. So there's several things that have to be considered at the same time. So a faculty, when they're ready for this evaluation, would have documented their level of teaching success, their rating by students and peers, and maybe observation and success of students, things like that. And then there's the service component. So faculty is expected to participate in university governance, and that could be at the division level, the college level, the university level, and even reflective of governance in associations like you're talking about, something external to the university. That's a service component. Neither of those are sufficient for advancement of a rank. The third leg of the stool here is really, really important. The foundational principle underlying advancement is that everybody who has an academic appointment should be functioning as a scholar, a university scholar. And I think it's really important that universities describe what that means to them. What is the definition of a scholar? What are those things that reflect good scholarship? Whether it's through a creative activity or an experiment that was done in a research lab, or an experiment was done in the context of a region or a nation, a public health type of research practice, qualitative, quantitative research practices, published or somehow else presented to the community of peers for evaluation. There's lots of different types of scholarship. But it's dependent upon the faculty's ability to articulate what that scholarship is that's most important to the evaluation of that scholarship as deemed necessary for rank. Then the deliberative process involves a committee, the peers of that person, who will then deliberate on the person's portfolio and come to a decision as to whether or not that is sufficient for making rank. I don't know of any situation other than very few where somebody has some seminal activity, some big thing that goes on, like, Kris got to go to, Durban, South Africa, so that was a big event, so we'll give him a raise, or he played Carnegie Hall or something like that. That's pretty rare, although I think it does happen at time and again. But it's mostly reflective of things that happen over years, and there's a sequence that's expected where your first publication perhaps is at a level of journal, or your conference participation is regional as opposed to national and international. Your publication, maybe it's a book or something, gets picked up by a lower level publisher, and the expectation is the next thing you do is be a little bit stronger, a little bit more robust as you define what robust is in a scholarly domain. So I think the conversation here would be wise to focus on what we define as a successful scholar in every domain. And we can go on to talk about that if you want, but I just kind of want to showcase the importance of context. Every school in the United States would approach this differently. Our university has its unique approach to this, and even within the university we have 7 divisions that all are unique in terms of how they evaluate faculty within those divisions.
Great. Thank you, Kris. Yeah, I will engage you on the notion of the scholar a bit later in the discussion. So I'd now like to actually move the discussion to Mareli to actually explain to us what are the challenges that existed within the system as you've seen it. Firstly, from the point of view as a student, you grew up in the system pretty much in the transformed sense of the word. Transformation for us, commenced at around 1994 with the new South Africa. So we don't want to go too much into the legacy of apartheid and things like that. We want to deal with the context in which we are working with now. The challenges you see in the academy and where do you see the blockages? That's the first one. And the second is if you can talk a little bit about this policy that we have on creative output. How do you see the policy? Is it a good move? It's not a good move? What are your ideas around the policy? And if you can reflect a little bit on, touch a little bit on what Kris had to say.
Well, I think it's nice to just move forward from what Kris said about context. It's extremely important, I think, to understand our own history and the way in which our universities developed, came about, and how music has been functioning within the university. So our models are British models, generally. We don't have conservatoires. We've never had them. We've always had universities with music departments. But those departments for many decades have been run in a conservatoire-like fashion. So we had always this incredible division between the scholarly staff members or the academic staff members in music departments and the practical staff members. And it seems, or it has seemed in the past, that never the twain shall meet in a way. The practical staff members were not producing any kind of research or engaging in scholarly activities like going to a conference, like being part of societies. So the academic citizenship was not something which was punted. And fair enough, because most of these people were appointed as primarily instrumental teachers because of their practical skills. But as South Africa's universities began to transform, the imperatives changed. And now, for us to be successful music departments, we have to contribute to a larger knowledge project. You cannot only teach a vocational skill. We simply don't have the funds, I think, to sustain departments that teach thinking on the one hand and playing on the other. It seems like a no-brainer that these things have to be integrated. But in the past, this has not actually happened. And our own systems didn't help the problem. So until fairly recently, many universities offered a DMUS degree, where you were examined for a mini dissertation and separately from that examined on a practical level. Obviously, the question comes up, how do you examine performance at a doctoral level as opposed to a master's level? Is it about quantity of how many pieces you perform? Or is it about length of recitals? How do you judge that? And so, although these degrees were offered at least until 2009 by several universities, this has become scaled down a lot. One of the reasons is that we have a new higher education qualifications framework since 2013. So it seems as if this DMUS, where there's a very strong division between practical and theoretical work, is going to be phased out. I know the United States has a DMA, Doctoral of Musical Arts, I think. Several universities offer that, which is a much more broad program. And it's a taught doctoral program in many instances. In South Africa, this was not the same. So what we looked at even then was a kind of reinforcement of the separation of theoretical and practical work. You'd have a theoretical supervisor or academic supervisor, and you'd have a practical teacher, and that reinforced that whole division. What's been happening in recent years is it seems, and I did a degree like that at Stellenbosch University between 2010 and 2012. They've referred to it as an integrated degree, where you had to show connection between your practical work and your theoretical work. It had to be mutually informative. And this is very close to what we find in Europe fairly often. They refer to this as a practice-based research approach or an artistic research approach. And doctoral degrees in an artistic research paradigm is becoming more and more common. South Africa is not quite there yet, where we offer carefully worked out programs for artistic research doctorates. What groups like the Orpheus Institute in Belgium has discovered is you can't just bring someone who's been focusing on practice all their lives and at master's level performed extremely well into a doctoral program and assume that theoretical knowledge and exposure to those kinds of scholarship will just be inherent. You have to teach it in a way. You have to help them catch up to someone who has been working in an academic way on degrees for a while. And we don't have that kind of program in South Africa yet, but I think the time is ripe for us to think about artistic research as a very viable, very vital way for people working in academia, specializing as practitioners, to use their practical knowledge, the insights that are unique to them in their practice, but to find a way to translate that and broaden that into a scholarly realm. As for the new policy by the DHET, it's a very interesting policy, and as yet it hasn't been tested. So there are very stringent peer review guidelines. The policy mentions things like scholarship, creative work that contributes to scholarship, creative work that is innovative, new, non-commercial. It's not just a policy that says if you play 5 concerts a year, you are now going to get a subsidy equivalent to that of publishing a book or an article. And it's going to be interesting to see how the peer review functions for that. Essentially, an academic also does not get credit for writing an article for a newspaper. He or she gets credit when it's a peer-reviewed publication. Similarly, if you do a gig, even if it's in Carnegie Hall, if it's not peer-reviewed, if there's not a process in place that can judge it in terms of its contribution to new knowledge or innovation in the field, then it's very difficult to reward that kind of thing. But the policy makes very specific demands in that sense. So it's going to be interesting to see how universities respond to this, and creative practitioners in particular. And the field is open for that.
Good. Thanks, Mareli. I'm interested in the whole notion around artistic research and also practice-led research. And here I want to come back to Kris, because you started a center for music and medicine. What led to this kind of center? What sort of brought about this kind of interdisciplinary case that you actually have, which I think is unique, because some kind of practice had led to this point. It didn't come out of just music itself or researching into music. So I'm very curious to know how you actually got to that point, because this could serve as a model for us, here.
Yeah, it's a great question. I was very fortunate in my doctoral studies to have had faculty mentors who were open to allowing my committee to not be prescribed and or traditionally oriented to theoretical and the practical, but to facilitate the creative act that I was engaged in. And I'm using that word creative to make a point that some of the most successful researchers are creatives. So you talk about, the jazz musician is the performer as the creative. Well, I would say as a researcher and a performer, that in some ways I'm more creative as a researcher. And I think the creativity not only informs and creates new novel ways to think and to move forward, which is the reason why I would do research, it enables all kinds of interesting interactions between and across disciplines. So back to the good fortune I had, my doctoral committee, when I had an idea to study the influence of music vibration on pain associated with rheumatoid arthritis, which was the dissertation that I published for my PhD, I had several challenges. I had the challenge of understanding the way the body responded to vibration. So I had a rheumatologist who was familiar with the neurology associated with pain transmission through the body on my committee, also to enable me to test my hypothesis in a clinical setting with people that had this kind of problem, to be able to measure the results of this intervention. I had a music therapist on my committee who helped me understand how to conceptualize the musical aspects to this. I had an electrical engineer on my committee who helped me understand how to deal with the technical transduction process of acoustic to mechanical energy. I had a physicist on my committee who helped me deal with some of the challenges of controlling and managing vibration. And so I came from a training scenario where I was enlightened to the idea that I didn't have to be a physicist, an electrical engineer, an audiologist, or a music therapist to actually look at my problem, my agenda, through their lens. And that offered me, I think, a wonderful opportunity to be able to articulate opportunities as I move forward. And so back to the center, we call our center now, by the way, the Texas Center for Performing Arts Health. It was founded in 1999 as the Texas Center for Music and Medicine, And the music medicine term was derived because it was connecting music and medicine for the benefit of really to explore all relationships between music and medicine. But we were focused specifically on the health needs, the occupational health needs of the performing artist. And we since changed the name to broaden it out, so public health kind of implies a broader agenda than, say, medicine. It's not just treatment-oriented, so it's kind of looking at population characteristics of people of interest. So when we started this thing, I had that mindset of being oriented to the problem that I saw, which was obvious, and every musician should see it, that we are the most understudied and underserved occupational group on the planet who do so much wonderful, magical things for everybody. Mm-hmm. People don't care about us as people. When we talk about studying music, I think about music as an action that people do, not a book of scores and stuff like that. I mean, there's a place for studying that, but I'm more interested in people like myself who have passion and drive to go out there and communicate and provide a wonderful service to humanity. So when I started thinking about this, I thought, how come I've gone through education in the public schools from 4th grade through middle school, through high school, Berklee College of Music, a master's degree, a doctorate degree in music, and nobody ever told me that I need to be worried about the sound I create when I make music so I don't go deaf. Nobody ever told me that I need to worry about my physical being when I play trumpet so I don't end up with weird hands and stretched out neck tissue and ruptured orbicularis muscle in my face and all the mental health anguishes associated with the economics of being a working musician, the social stigmas of playing gigs, all this kind of thing. I was totally unprepared for the realities of being a professional musician from that point of view. And I was a 6-night-a-week professional musician. I was totally unprepared. So how come we're doing that? How come we're not saying, wait a minute, you're coming to study piano, classical piano, I want to make you successful in the arena that you're going to go out in, not just in terms of your ability to play, but your ability to manage that kind of occupation. And so we started focusing on what we don't know. What do piano players have as physical problems? Well, we've done studies on that. We found out that, 86% of our piano majors have hand problems. So you might say, well, how do we deal with that? Well, let's do some research. So we're applying our research scholarly activities in a creative way to try to figure out how to make life better for people who have this kind of problem. So it's a very applied, we have a reason why we're doing this research. It's not to go publish a paper, that we want to disseminate our information that way, but more importantly, we got a problem that we need to solve. Right? Interesting scenario, we ended up solving much of the problem by using piano keyboards that are sized the way they were when the virtuosic literature was written, not the way they are today, which was developed by men 100 years ago. Chopin was writing octaves when he was 8 years old because he had a different size piano. A lot of our, like yourself, a lot of our classical piano majors in our university are female and are Asian, smaller hands. So a simple ergonomic intervention helps reduce the problem. Now, do a lot of schools want to adopt that kind of approach? No, so we got another problem. We have like a social problem. We have a health education problem, right? So we have more research. In fact, I have a student from South Korea right now doing a dissertation on measuring knowledge and attitudes of piano faculty across the United States and South Africa. Are they even aware that this piano existed? And if they understand a little bit of this, will they change their attitudes and change their practice? In fact, I spoke at a meeting of finalists for a piano competition in Indiana years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. That was a group of people presenting to 5 finalists, $100,000 cash award, year contract, touring, major orchestras. There was 3 men and 2 women who were competing, made the finalists, and we're talking about this. And they were shocked. They had no idea that the piano had this kind of history. And they're talking about back in their schools, our piano players have all kinds of hand problems. So I went through the whole thing about what our research shows, and our data can be reviewed here in this journal article and that journal article. And at the other end of the table, there was the manager of the competition. I said, sir, now that you know, would you allow your competitors to pick and choose a modified keyboard so that it's better suited for them to reduce what we know is a problem and what it was when that literature that they're playing was composed. And just like this, absolutely not. They don't have the right hands for piano, they should find something else to do. Okay? I could go on with stories like this a lot. So just in that one little scenario, you can see the need for understanding biomechanics, ergonomics, postural, you can look at it from a human performance engineering standpoint. There's lots of ways to look at this. So I forgot totally what your question was, but my answer is interdisciplinarity opens up everybody's eyes to be more creative.
Yep.
And you don't have to have rigorous training to be able to talk and think like an engineer. You just have to have an open mind and be able to find colleagues who are interested in this similar kind of topic and an open enough space for them to contribute collectively. So the vast majority of the students that get dissertations done under my mentorship have community participation from a broad set of professors on our campus. So I'll tell a student, hey, you're interested in self-handicapping as a psychological concern for students, which, by the way, is a big deal. Go find a psychology faculty who's done research in that area. Right? If you want to work on, what happens to the throat when you're playing oboe and high intraoral pressures, let's go find a speech-language pathologist who can help us understand intraoral pressure. Right? Let's build a team.
Right.
And so I would just, I want to reiterate this point. When you say the creatives, if you said as a researcher, I'm not a creative, I would be, standing up a little straighter and wait a minute. I'm a jazz musician, I'm trained, and I create. Sure, I'm a musician, but I think in some ways my research is actually more creative. And the reason why it's gotten traction, we just realized our work has influenced the national standards for accreditation. So now every school in the United States, this is the practical aspect of this, the relevancy, the meaning. Every one of the 650 accredited schools in the United States who teach music have to teach kids about hearing health, musculoskeletal health, auditory health, hearing health, and mental health and vocal health. They have to do it.
That's great.
As a consequence of being creative. As a consequence of doing research, looking at a problem that's obvious to all of us. So I would assume that you have all kinds of, unique local problems within the musician community. So who's looking at those people?
It's amazing, this openness that you talk about, and it resonates really a lot with an artistic research disposition, the idea that everything is available to you. And if you're working on something quite specialized, find the specialists, engage with them, but don't close ranks within your own discipline and decide, I'm doing music, it's specialist, it's about only a specific type of thinking. Be open and draw in as many things as you can, and that always leads to a kind of intellectual abundance, I think.
And this goes back to our conversation in the green room back there, where if we have a problem that might come up against some resistance due to tradition or fear or the idea that you're challenging me. So, I have lots of stories to be able to talk about that kind of stuff. For instance, I know, because I've collected more data than anybody else in the world, that sound levels generated during ensemble-based instructional activities are not related to the acoustics of the room. They're related, but they're not caused by it. There's huge variability in the sound output that can be traced to what the teacher does. The pedagogic approach to managing an ensemble is reflected in the sound energy. So when you say, hey, I want to be able to work with you as a conductor, but by the way, you're the conductor that generates a lot of sound, you might get some resistance, right? So the approach, the way you talk about it, you're looking for positive solutions, that kind of an attitude. And I've learned the hard way over years that's needed to encourage people to embrace your project or to embrace the idea of being a partner. And that can go all the way up to the institutional level.
Mareli, we want to comment about your engagement with artistic research.
Well, as I said before, I started did a degree at Stellenbosch University. It was quite new. Since the conclusion of that degree process, I've been quite fortunate to be connected with this Orpheus Institute in Belgium, and I've visited them several times and had some residencies there. And then I was asked to join the editorial board of the Journal for Artistic Research, which is an international open access journal. And what's been quite extraordinary is that the fights that we fight here, the education politics types of engagements, should there be a DMAS or not? Should we have integration of practical work and academic work or not? Should we fund creative output? All those things. It's like those discussions in that artistic research sphere is old by now. The discussions have moved so far beyond, is there such a thing as artistic research? There's just an absolute open-mindedness about it. So now when there's criticism of artistic research projects, it's about the quality of artistry, or it's about the quality of the integration, or about the impact of the research. And the Journal for Artistic Research, for example, includes interdisciplinary projects, music and medicine, music and health projects, anything you can imagine. And the quality of the project is judged in a very different way from what it is judged as here. And I think what South Africa needs is to have a really concerted engagement with artistic research. We have to have universities getting on board with this so that we can start building up our own body of work that can almost become paradigmatic, so that we can have something to refer to. It ties in with all sorts of different things, with indigenous knowledge systems, with the general idea of Ubuntu, this idea that you have many different things working together in the creation of new knowledge. Not having so many divisions, thinking of the existing divisions as porous and not as completely fixed. And in that sense, you can start drawing on knowledges from across the board, across the spectrum. But before we start engaging with it, we won't have this body of work to refer to. And if universities now look at the new 2017 policy, the DHET policy about creative output being subsidized, and if they use this as a kind of excuse to continue reinforcing divisions, that would be an enormous pity. Because artistic research is really an opportunity for us to also train students to think of their practice as a gateway to more than just their own performance, as a pathway into creation of knowledge which is applicable to them and enhancing of their own practice, but also applicable to a much broader community of performers, of creatives, of scholars. And why do we need to make those divisions anyway, of people involved in the knowledge project in some way?
Good. Yeah. Kris, Mareli, thank you very much. I have one final question for you because we've actually run out of time. So I'd just like to have your ideas on what is scholarship and research. Is it the same thing? Is there a difference? These are your closing comments. So if you could just touch on these, we will go with Mareli first this time. We've just passed the month for women, so it was in August. We are now already approaching October, so we'll get Mareli and then Kris. Yeah.
Scholarship and research, maybe that's another one of those things you can think about in two ways, in a philosophical way and in an academic politics or education politics sense. If you think about it in a philosophical way, the two can be very closely related. Someone who is a scholar of a topic has done research, and that actually applies to your creative, if you want to use that word. Anybody that does a very strong performance, a convincing performance, has done a lot of research into their instruments, into their own physicalities, into the text, into the composer, all these different things. But there's a difference between doing research and showing research. And so if we talk about education politics in a sense, then I would say research can be an act or an activity. Scholarship in a way has more to do with a frame of mind, I think. You can be a scholar without thinking necessarily about exactly how the output will function, how many points it's going to earn you. Scholarship is something which impacts on your teaching, on your way of being a member of an academic community. Research translates very quickly into output, especially in our country at the moment. Scholarship, I think, is something which is much more broad. And in a sense, perhaps at university level, even more essential if you want to go with narrow definitions of what research is. If a definition of scholarship includes strong commitment to teaching, openness to interdisciplinary work, engagement with creative practice if you're in that type of department, then I would say scholarship is the more valuable of the two terms in a way.
Kris?
Yeah, I think the term scholarship is really important for the university community to think about, and they have. Our university was just awarded Tier 1 status as a research university a year or two ago. And so we have a lot of discourse regarding what it means to be that. And it's a label that comes from the Carnegie Foundation's framework. And maybe just to and you almost captured their framework for defining types of scholarship in what you just said. So they have, in fact, last year's conference, you had a heavy focus on the scholarship of teaching and learning, which is one of the three types of scholarship that this framework would identify. The other one is very much connected to what I've been talking about, the scholarship of integration. So the breaking down of silos, the ability to be interdisciplinary focused and all that. And then the third one is the scholarship of discovery. And that might actually be presented as the first one, and that's when somebody comes up with something new and novel that everybody says, wow, what an amazing new thing. That happens very rarely. And then, what is it to be a scholar? And I ask my students this a lot, and I have them contemplate their own perceptions of what that is and some of these definitions as they get trained to become a scholar. It's very difficult to say what a scholar is, but I know what it's not. It's certainly not rote and routine. Yep. Okay? So, and then, so kind of move that off and then push the research up. This is a very, very challenging area to discuss if we want to somehow whittle it down to some bare essentials. To do research as an academic, where you would eventually be promoted because of it, or it kind of fits into your scholarly agenda, versus a student who goes to the library to do research, collects information, compiles stuff. To me, yeah, that's research, but the kind of research that I do that in preparation for is something that is going to make a unique contribution. So to me, research is something that happens, that when it's completed, it's in the public sphere, and as an applied researcher, to me, it matters that it has some relevance to some issue that I've been able to articulate prior to doing the research. I justified what it is that I'm going to do, and that's based on what's been done. I think that's a very important part. And then once it's rationalized as being something of need, however that's rationalized, then I rationalize how I'm approaching it. And I have to be a scholar in doing that. I have to be accountable to methodologies that would be appropriate to attack that problem that way. And then once I'm all done with the data collection, the write-up, or whatever it is that I'm going to present, I have to present it. I have a very close mentor, an electrical engineer faculty. He's actually electrical engineering and human performance engineering professor at University of Texas in Arlington. George Kondrowski is his name. George, if you watch this, hello, I'm thinking about you. George told me years ago, he said, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So, even if you are doing a concert and you're calling it scholarly, you need to write down information that rationalized why you did what you did, right, as a scholar would. Capture it, publish it, put it out there for peer review. That whole research process from end to end is necessary in order for research to be relevant. And just in closing, this is also important in the United States right now as it relates to the humanities specifically, because there's an agenda to change humanities. And it's not just in music, it's in all the humanities, to make the research process in the humanities more relevant to humanity. Why do we do this? What happens to it? What's the big deal? We've got a lot of problems to solve, and some of them can be solved and dealt with through the lens of the humanities.
Great. Thank you, Mareli. Thank you, Kris. Thank you very much for your time. And colleagues, there you have it. I hope this would inspire several of you to attend the conference that we have going at the moment at the Langeni Hotel. And we look forward to the presentation by Professor Kris Chesky tomorrow in his keynote address at this particular conference. Thank you very much.